every university, the system is not ordered for you to die there. But everywhere death can be not even be mentioned, because those are places of death, the place of dying. But we never even think about it. Why should the death of one student exist, and the death of 10 people in my name not matter, or between differently? Because one place is a place of death. So colonialism and oppression does order our minds not to see certain things. So when we deal with this thing, when we talk about issues of injustice, it's about making sure that we are sensitive to those realities and we make them possible and we make them visible. This is why I said, at the level of academic and level curriculum, beyond the broader level, at the institutional level, we've taken a position that we are going to become a node for African thought. At the curriculum level, we are also saying we need to be able to unmask those neurosensitive tendencies and expressions that are in our curriculum that make our students feel like they're children of the lesser God. Secondly, we need to reverse the erasure that there's been a contribution by all people, the pyramids of knowledge, as some of my colleagues have put it, that they have not been into the classroom. Those pyramids of knowledge need to find an accommodation. And when you do that, you produce individuals much more sophisticated, who have more intellectual resources than simply a perspective from one space. And then that one is also really about doing some of the discussions about our own realities, where we find ourselves being defined by people who don't even understand us and our situation. It is also about ensuring that we move from being defined to be the ones who do the definition. So that was basically the last 2 days in where we try to grapple with the basis of the bigger challenge that is bigger than us, and that history has imposed on us. And given our history, we have no business in failing those who ensure that we get them. So today, I would like to touch base on the history of decolonizing of knowledge. And there's a reason why one wants to touch on that history. You touch on it because first it humbles you to understand that you are not original, that there are people you can learn on, and learn from. Sir Isaac Newton is known to have said that I've seen further than the others. It is because I stood on the shoulders of the giants. So when we do these historical lessons, it is on the shoulders of these giants that we stand, who are going to guide us. It's also to say we are part of history. That's why I say we must always move towards historicizing our location. We dealt with on contemporary politics of knowledge, and yesterday we dealt with how knowledge is colonized. Now I want to make state this, that what we are trying to do is give you a sense of the type of course that we are basically for all academics who are going to be teaching at University of Zululand. Because if we don't shape the thinking at every university, we will not be able to influence. It will be poorer teachers to our own students. And I'll give you just one about why this appears to be an ambitious project. And to call him out by meeting him. And one of the things that in our history that we can learn about perspective. Actually, one of my first book in 1996 was on a black perspective on transformation of higher education. And the idea of a black perspective, it was a perspective that I was focusing on. It was not only about facts, but it is about the perspectives on those facts. And the importance of perspective is that it raises the power beyond simply the interpretation of facts. Now, when you talk about some of the perspectives, I'll just give you an example of the black consciousness philosophy. And there's a question that when I was in work, the colleagues were saying that how do you guys think you are going to succeed at the University of Zululand when we had failed in America and when we had failed in the continent? And I simply into that, we had a very successful philosophy that reshaped what we do in the 70s, and that was the black consciousness philosophy. And there was something significant about the black consciousness philosophy that once you understood it, and once you are imbued with that philosophy, you are then able to apply it to wherever you go. For those who were in law, they were able to approach law from that perspective. Those who were in the churches, they were able to approach a religion from that perspective. Those who were in communities were able to approach their functions in that. Those who were medical doctors and teachers, during the time where people were at university were imbued by that spirit of that consciousness, that they would go from university and go and teach for free in the schools. This is what the black people, the people like Mandela who were imbued by that spirit, they also went into communities to start clinics. But because of the high philosophy, that is when it's understood, it drives people to start doing things very differently. Those who thought that their business in the church is simply to wait until the hereafter, understood that they have the responsibility to make sure that injustice is fought today. This is why people like when approach the public government that you see, I don't need books, I need this book. This book, the Bible says, because you have to be by the spirit of black consciousness. It says this book is the most revolutionary book. It says we are all children of God and we are created equal. So I demand equality. But that's what the perspective does. It changes how you see things. It changes how you act. It also, black perspectives is that which allowed young people during our time to make sure that we will face the might of apartheid. When apartheid came with its weapons, young people even defied death itself. It is that perspective that ultimately, so once people are imbued with that, then they, in their places, they find how that finds its own expression. It's not something that will dictate to the people in law or people in commerce or people in sociology, but the perspective that we are trying to put of a decolonized curriculum will find, once it is understood, in the same way that all other systems which we're going to touch will be able to shape the thinking of African Americans. But they're just to those on the black consciousness philosophy. When the Mandelas and everybody used to approach the apartheid regime by pleading, by explaining that we're also human, what the black perspective did was to accept what Biko and Bani Bichana said, that black men, you are on your own. But the effect of that, and most people did not understand that, it was the statement that was made by Biko that the less we talk about whites, the better. That we cannot spend time finding fault with whiteness. What we need to do is to reclaim the agency to ourselves. where we say change will occur because of us, not because a white person and a white regime has changed its mind. And that's a very different perspective. If you read the history of the ANC for almost 30, 60 years, they were pleading, writing letters, making interpretations, and pleading to change, to say we're also human. But and also the Mandela's talking about the issue of legitimacy. But what the black consciousness philosophy did says, no, change is in your hands. You need to be the change that you want to become. So it was really about reclaiming the agency of shaping the future instead of being dependent on other people. And this is what we're trying to do at Zulu. We are not trying to be like other people. We are claiming our right to shape the type of graduates we're going to produce, the type of university that we would like. And that, when we do that, we need to understand that we're not alone. And there have been other people who have walked this path. And Professor Moyo will know of the conference he should have attended, but looking at him, I see that he didn't attend that conference that took place in 1972, when the African Association of African Universities met. And one of the things that they dealt with is how to create the African University. And in doing that, they even explained what that means. That what we mean, we're talking about creating universities that are indigenous, creating universities that are designed and equipped to serve the needs of specific African societies where they are located. So that when we talk about problems in this region, we should be able to be saying we are the only ones who can provide a better answer, because those are problems that we understand better because we go through them, instead of being able to talk about problems of other people that we don't even understand. So that is so the notion of creating an African university is not something new, but it is something that has not been realized. It's still a work in progress. So what we are doing here is simply to take on the baton that these guys, and by the way, Director of Library, the book is available. I think it's out of print, but these days I think you guys can get PDF versions. Check the book by Yosufu called Creating the African University, because that will also empower us by understanding what were the issues that they were being dealt with, and then also to say what is it that has changed and what the modification should occur in our time, because at that time Africa was not free. Now with Africa, I mean free in the political sense, or free in the what people call the juridical administrative sense, then they will be able to say these are the challenges that they face, and this is how they approach them. And it allows you not to reinvent the wheel. So that is the whole thrust. So the point one is making is that we can only benefit by talking to those people who has walked the path and who know the road better. But I'll go back to for today's lecture, or this monologue. I know it will have to be a polylogue later. We start with Ian Smith, who said, because the people like Ian Smith have not disappeared, we still have some who harbor this notion that I would say colonialism is a wonderful thing. It spread civilization to Africa. Before it, they had no written language, no wheels, no wheel as we know it, no school, no hospital, not even normal clothing. I don't know about the normal clothing part, but you guys can talk about clothing in this part of the world, you know. But the point is that Ian Smith could say that. But what Chinua Achebe is also reminding us of is that until the lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter. I repeat, that's very important. Until the lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter. Unquote. The profundity of that is that until you start telling your own story, some people will tell it on your behalf, and you'll only discover later that when you say, "Can I say, but the chief, we've already covered you." And this is what happens in most cases. And let me tell you, when we got a document from the Department of Higher Education, when I was here 3 years ago, the document was talking about us, without us. And when you read it, you also get that their description of University of Zululand, or also historically black universities, is not what pertains to these universities. For some reason, we've been treated like we're supposed to be junior partners in the higher education, that we should be chaperoned. Actually, they talked about, they came up with a concept of a community of practice. There's nothing wrong with that, where people of the same discipline get together and all that. But when you read it carefully, it was almost like you are going to be taught by these so-called historically white universities. It's embedded even by people who are supposed to have been in the struggle. But because, you see, it also talks about what type of struggle we're engaged in. Because some of the people were engaged in a struggle of replacement of white people, but not replacement of the system of oppression. When we grew up in the 60s and 70s, we used to talk about the system. We're not talking about the color of people. That's why we used to say that it is not the color of your skin that bothers us. It is the color of your politics. And we're very clear. And because what you also needed to do is to understand that replacing a black person by a white person, a man by a woman, without changing the system and the internal logic of the system, you are not going to do any. It remains the same. I mean, this is why, I don't know how many of you knew that when the Iron Lady put her cabinet together, it was all males. And of course, another Iron Lady in South Africa did exactly the same thing, until there was a complaint that where are other people? Because what she did was to also appoint all white males. And the people in that part of the province said, "What happened to all of us who were supporting you?" Then she said, "Okay, no, but I look at merit." And then through pressure, she started putting black people, women. Suddenly she discovered them. But the point is, until you understand the internal logic of the system, you are going to repeat. And the system reproduces what the system must reproduce. So that's why in this, when Biko said, no, it is not the color of one's skin. And also black is not simply a definition of a skin color. It is your orientation towards oppression. And it is for that reason that we said, you say, and the others, that we have black people here and we have many non-white people. And by the non-whites, he meant those black people who are spending all their time aspiring to be white, but they will never be white, Okay, so that's it. So I'm putting this as a basis of, and this may be the most important slide, that if you can forget everything that I said, you must remember this: what colonialism and the colonialists think. Two, that until you tell your own story, then some people will tell it on your behalf. And when we intervened in that book and produced the book that you guys must also get, director of the libraries, there's a book called the New Zulu Conversations. If you read that book, one of the things that we do is to grapple with that document and to quarrel with it, to simply say, no, this is not how we're going to allow ourselves to be described and to be defined. So that is, then the third aspect that you must also remember for the rest of your life, especially those people who control nothing, is that the ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas. But it is the second aspect that says the trust which has the means of material production at its disposal has control at the same time over the means of mental production. That those who control the means of production, until you can control that, you will not be able to control the means of intellectual production. And if you are a university, that statement tells you that until you have your own platform, and this is why, as I say, you don't even have to go further than South Africa to look at what the Afrikaners did when they got into ascendancy politically. They said, how do we lift up the race? And they simply said, the fact that we excluded as black people is immaterial, but the point is that what they were saying is that you need to have the structures, you need to create the ecosystems that are supportive of your agenda. That is a statement that they were making. And if we are going to sit here and say we're going to change without creating a supportive ecosystem, then we're misleading ourselves. And what does the ecosystem mean? It includes the resources. So when the Vice Chancellor talks about creating an African university, you should know that there'll be issues of resources that must come to be. You need to also understand that there must be an enabling environment. You need to know that you should also have your own journals. And that's what Afrikaners did, because if it's not your own journal, the people who sit there, they can choose whether they are going to publish what you want to put there. The guys in New York, if you're going to write a very nice article about malaria, because they don't have to deal with malaria, they're not going to publish your story. Because their problems are something else. Their problems are largely psychotic. You know, I mean, the most highly paid people in the U.S. are the clinical psychologists. And also those who specialize, Professor Calvino, if you really think of making money, go to the US and go into divorce space. Because the divorce is a big business there, you know, so you can make a lot of money, you know. So the long and short of it is that it's important that you have the ecosystem that will support you. And so that the issues that are pertinent to you find expression. And Afrikaners did that. They also decided to lift up the language, to simply say, we're going to make sure that every child or education is not about distancing yourself from your own culture. That when you move from home, an African-speaking home, you go into a class, you don't disrobe your Africanness. You go there as an Afrikaner, you come out as an Afrikaner. And when you are a black person in South Africa, you come to this university, you disrobe your Africanness, and you become something else and very confused. And only after you've picked up your books and you're out of the campus, then you reclaim your Africanness. This is why people like the late Herbert Villagat says the difference with all other people in the world is that when Japanese get educated, they remain Japanese. When the European gets educated, they remain European. When an American gets educated, they remain American. But when an African becomes educated, they become Europeanized or Americanized. And you know all of them, when they even start speaking with as if they were born in the U.S., even after spending only two weeks or 3 days in the U.S. Now, the challenge that we must also face is a challenge that was put to us by Johnny Steinbeck. I also want you to remember this quote because it's important. Because I'm starting first with the broader concepts that you can anchor on the tools to understand what we're dealing with. And what John D. Steinbeck, who writes for the Business Day, you can pick up that quote and Google it and you'll find the full article. He says what happened in South Africa in 1994 was magical. Says he puts it he says the freedom acquired was mercurial
I don't know if you know what the mercury does. I mean, if you are in physics and chemistry, you try to touch a mercury, it's very mercurial. You can't even hold it. So mercurial and slippery. That's a whole concept of mercury. Politically, the changes were dramatic. The electorate expanded overnight to include every adult, but the structure of society stayed much the same. And white people remained white people, doing what white people had always done, turning the profession, the corporation, or running the professions, the corporations, the universities. Expertise, wealth, technical knowledge, and social confidence. That's the point I want to. Social confidence, all of this remained deeply associated with whiteness. Until we produce students and we have academics who are confident socially that you don't enter spaces apologizing. Have you seen how people, when they go into a place, they are always, even when they are on time, they apologize for being on time. They're late, always apologizing and all that. It is what the system has done to us, that we are always apologetic. So the social confidence that we thought 1994 would have given us does not changed. And in my book, by the way, who did I give my book to yesterday? Prof. Kuzwayo, that book, it's a loan. In it, Mahoba, I asked him to write a chapter on, by the way, that's a book that also colleagues here must read. Because what I'm also doing here, I'm simply giving you a glimpse of the 3 to 6 month program that we want academics here to go through. One of the things that I asked him to do is to reflect on his return from the US, that they said from the UK, that what were your impressions when you came here? It says, when you come to South Africa and you are at, whether he was at the Medical Research Council, whether he was at WITS, whether he was at UKZN, you ask people to do something. Says, and he puts it correctly, that if there's a window that's broken, there's a South African way of resolving the broken window. Says, what you do, you set up a committee. And you make sure that the committee is representative. And then you come up with a plan. And then thereafter, in the end, it will be a white person who's going to fix the window. And the others will then claim that they fixed the window. But he says, you guys are so obsessed. Instead of just doing go and buy a glass and fix the window, you set up committees. And look at how many committees we actually have put in this country. If there's a problem, even before the problem has been articulated, somebody is called, hey, put a committee together to look into that matter. But what it does is because there's an absence of confidence. So you think because you are a group, because you have this, there's nothing wrong with representativity in composition of committees. But some things can simply be done. But what we do, we always find an excuse. And that's why things are not working. If you to look at the current government, you look at the committees that have been put in the last 5 years. You'll be lucky if there are less than 200. Everything. If the sun doesn't shine today, put a committee to look into it. Everything that we do is all about, but it boils down to what John Steinbeck said. The notion of social confidence is what is actually missing. So when we talk about the decolonization, it's also about making sure that we deal with the effects. These are the effects of colonialism. That what they did was to destroy the people in terms of the confidence to themselves and of themselves. They lack that confidence. Now, the way that was achieved is through what is called a pesticide. And these are terms that you should also be able to acquire. because they are part of the language. When the people talk about the discourse, you have words that are loaded, that are pregnant in meaning, but that make it easier to understand. When you read Bewaji in one of the books that we produced, a note for African thought, he talks about there's been a lot of talk about genocide. There's been a lot of talk about infanticide. There's a lot of talk about all other sides, but the word has not been looked at is epistemicide, that the destruction that has occurred, and it has occurred at the number level, the destruction of people's knowledge. First, it's through the denial of existence of that. No people anywhere in the world could have existed for thousands of years without acquiring some life-affirming knowledge. Yesterday I was giving an example that even the notion of childbirth, almost every grouping human beings, they know how to do it in such a way that the children come alive. Of course, you do have mortality rates that are high because of many other things like diseases of poverty that exist. But by and large, all people were able to have children born in their own communities. But so effectively what I'm also saying is that people have acquired knowledge that is life affirming. They've also answered questions, philosophical questions, that what does death mean? So these are all what human beings do. But as Ian Smith says, that we had no civilization, we had no history, we could not do anything, and you should hear what Jan Smuts, I was looking at the comment by Jan Smuts when he was addressing one of the universities, I think Oxford, what he said about us, you'll actually be shocked, And after he did that, they put a statue for him in the UK. But he said some things that are not printable about us. But anyway, it's part of what you call epistemicide. So the issue is to deny the contribution of Africans, intellectual contribution to humanity. And what it does, then it confuses people who say that, because then suddenly you see the pyramids. By the way, the pyramids are not only in Egypt; they are also in other African countries. Then you have to ask, but how do you explain these pyramids? And because those of you who have done a bit of mathematics and physics, there is a huge major science that's involved there to understand how the people could put such huge, heavy stones together, and they've been in existence for over 3,000 years before you had the so-called fathers of mathematics, And even, I was taught by an algebraist. He was from Persia. He was always offended when I said he was Arab, and he wanted to tell me that no, he's from. He says, I'm Persian. I'm not. I'm not Arab. There's a distinction. And then he talks about the civilization that they created, and that they are the real mathematicians, And if you read, those of you who read the Bible, read about Mesopotamia, where there was also a lot of maths that studied there, and he came from that area. You maybe called Iraq and all that. So the epistemicides, what they did was to deny the contribution of all other people. This is where Eurocentrism comes in, where there's an erasure of people's knowledges in the world history. And then the second thing is an attempt that or efforts that an exercise that were taken. Some of them were violent, some were non-violent, but they all are directed at the group's intellectual heritage, ontological constructs, and metaphysical presuppositions, and including even their institutions of governance that existed. I'll give you an example. Some of you may also, something that you can Google. There are some people who are doing research, and you also have some companies that are in place like Eastern Cape, where they are asking people questions about how do they cure certain diseases, and they are looking for the herbs. And a friend of mine, you can look at his name, who has passed on, Godfred Humphrey, who was a professor at UNISA, originally from Jamaica, and studied in the UK. His work was to, as a chemist, was to look at the herbs that people use for various ailments. And what he was able to show was the one-to-one relationship in terms of the composition of those herbs and that which got produced in the laboratories. And what he was pointing out is that the people exist throughout these years because they understood this. And if anybody who studies chemistry will understand that most of the tablets are derivatives, or they come from people taking the herbs that have particular. So the herbs, our people have always mastered and had an understanding of if you are unwell. For instance, when there was COVID, there's something that people are taking here. What do you call it? Yeah, I'm Shonyana. I don't know. I'm an urban black. So. Yeah, I mean, no. I mean, it's true. We must sophisticate our being. I mean, this is why when we talk about African, we must sophisticate what African means, because I have no homeland. Other people have homelands. I mean, when I'm in Joburg during December, we feel at ease because there are people from KwaZulu-Natal. They go to KwaZulu-Natal, the Limpopo go to Limpopo, others go to Northwest, and suddenly we get surprised that there's so much oxygen. And there's but anyway, all I'm simply saying that I grew up in a different place. I mean, I used to talk to. I mean, and if you see that there's also difficulty that some people have, because what they do, they oscillate from various systems. I mean, if you listen to Mandela believed in Western democracy very strongly. But at the same time, when you listen to him, you also hear him talk about the chieftainship. You talk about him talking about the kings. You talk about so he was grappling with being in a two different world system, So when we talk about African, we must also sophisticate that African to also understand that colonialism was simply not a mere episode in our lives and in African lives, but it was also life changing. We don't emerge out of colonialism as people who were there before colonialism. So the sophistication of scholarship must also accommodate that. There are urban blacks, there are rural blacks, there are blacks who are oscillating and in between spaces, and some of them are confused, or all of them are confused. So you need to understand. But the epistemicide is really about, among other things, like I said yesterday, that one of the most important things about colonialism is to attack the mind of the colonized. And it's also to remove the sense of confidence in themselves. And the Afrikaners, to deal with that, they had to create a system that we can depend on ourselves. I mean, there was anger, Professor Moyo, when some Afrikaner guys decided to put money, 50 rands, together to put a university. And they wanted to be an Afrikaans university. And people wanted the minister to intervene. But I said that's a good thing. If you want to build an institution that will serve you, what is wrong with that? And the question was about what prevents us from doing the same. Because if you believe in something, you must also build those issues, those institutions, because you cannot expect other people to build that which you value. And this is where there's been a problem with Africans as a whole in the continent, that we have become so dependent that is all that we require. I said to Professor Moyo, I didn't say that to the program director, that I'm presenting a 3-month program, so they will have to be sympathetic about time. You can find enough time to eat other things and relax and all that, but let's at least deal with this other aspect. Now here's one part that I would like to put it that Professor Bawaji, who we invited from Jamaica, he says a pesticide is far more dangerous than both genocide and infanticide combined, but it often manifests in the most sophisticated and benign manner than either of these latter two, subtly appearing to create in the victim a Stockholm syndrome reaction and attitude. This is because a pesticide, when visited on the intellectual heritage of any group, society, or people, has a lasting effect which transmutes into internalized, replicable self-destruction of the intellectual heritage. So the thing about a pesticide is that once your heritage, intellectual heritage, your cultural heritage is destroyed, you start believing that is actually the norm. You know, when I worked briefly in Bahrain, in the Middle East, I met folks from Iraq who had run away from Saddam Hussein. And one of the discussions that we had was their experience of being in Bahrain. And what shocked me was they were angry, not so much, I didn't get the sense that they were talking about the many people who have actually died because of the war in Iraq. They were concerned about the civilization of over 3,000 years that was destroyed. It was because that anchored. It's like with the Native Americans. If anybody goes to the U.S. in those in the West where they are some located, you find that the land is linked to their cosmology. You take land away from them, you actually destroy their souls. So a pesticide does the same. It destroys the souls of black people. That's why W. Du Bois could talk about the souls of black folks. And it's a book that, again, director of library, I would prescribe it as one of the books that every academic must read. And in there, Du Bois talks about being seen as a black person as a problem. And when you look at the history of this country, even the article, the speech that I was talking about by Jan Smuts, it was always about solving a native problem, that we enter into the world as a problem to be solved. So when we talk about decolonization, we're talking about making sure that the black person does not enter the world as a problem. That the way you people say, now what do you want? I mean, said, no, I'm just here to greet. But because you are a problem, there's always that question. Mofuna animanch, you know. And the guy says, no, but boss, I thought. He said, no, don't thought, I'll thought for you, you know. Ngugi, in describing this brilliant, he says, the pesticide is almost like the effects of it is like having a cultural bomb that annihilates a people's belief in their names, in their language, in their environment, in the heritage of struggle, in their unity, in their capacities, and ultimately in themselves. This is the effect of what colonialism has done. That you see, it's insidious. You don't even realize it. But it works on you without you. It's one of those things that are so unconscious. Let me give you an example. I mean, this is where you need to understand. It's a thought system. I mean, that's the point I want to make. It works on your brain to an extent that you see things that are considered to be normal. If you get women in a group, say you've got about 100 of them, and you have 5 men who are feminists, or who call themselves feminists. If there's a position and you talk about leadership, you can rest assured that a man will be among those people who are elected by women. Because leadership is associated. This is how patriarchy works. And even if you have a woman there in a position, we expect that woman to behave like a man. I mean, even when we put meetings at universities or in workplaces, they are put in a sense that accommodates men in the afternoon. And yet the women are mothers. They'll be worried about the children. And the system excludes them that way. A woman says, but I've got to rush. So, but it's a thought system. And you also find the same thing with black people. If there is one white person in the room and there's position of leadership, you can rest assured that he doesn't have to campaign. He just has to be there. And they will say, what about him? Even he's not interested, then he finds himself being made to be interested because the leadership is associated with whiteness. And if it's a black person who comes there, he makes sure that he brings a white person next to him, because other than that, he's unsure. So the notion of a thought system is something that you need to understand. But what we're saying, colonialism, what it has done, it creates a sense of doubt. And among Africans, this sense of doubt is permanent. Now, what is your challenge? The challenge that we face today is an existential one. It's about justice. It's how do we write a people who were excluded from the human family back into the human family. Because one of the things that colonialism did and continues to do, and you also continue to contribute into it, is when you locate expertise within certain people. The books that you prescribe, they're all mostly from North America, Europe, etc. You are erasing the contribution of other people in that. So the issue is, how do you begin to correct that? You bring those people back into existence. That's why I say this is an issue of, it creates an existential crisis. And when we go out there, what we do, we have to quote those people before, as a way of claiming the right to speak. There was a time when the former President Mbeki spent more time quoting dead white people. They were poets. They were, but it was largely white and from England. And of course, he was being praised that he's a man of the classics, until it also emerged that some of the classics he didn't understand. And some of us came up with what you call Mbegism, that they're quoting people out of context and etc. And then he started quoting African people. But what it was a protest by people. But are you saying the wisdom only comes from the guys, dead white people from England? What about dead white people from Nigeria or here at home? And strangely, when I was running a business school, by the way, it was an international business school, one of the interesting things that we did was to look at Mandela as a case study on leadership. But no South African university was able to do that until Harvard did it. Only then do they rush, and Mandela was now prescribed as a study on leadership. But the South African universities, the black and white, did not have the confidence to actually do that, because they are all in the business of mimicking. They lack a sense of confidence in themselves. So, for instance, what we have done is you have a university called Nelson Mandela University. And you also have Walter Sisulu. If you ask the students there and academics, how does Mandela find expression or Sisulu in your university? Zero. But what it is, it's about appropriation of a name without bringing the totality of Mandela into this university. If you go to places like Harvard, where they've got the Kennedy School of Government, you'll see Kennedy all over. they infused the leadership of Kennedy, that he infused the thinking, etc. It's there. But what we do, we become simply happy with appropriation of names without bringing the history of what those people mean. And when I asked one of the professors at Nelson Mandela, I said, "No, it's in the ethos." I said, "No, but why call it Nelson Mandela University?" Because when you call it Nelson Mandela, I expect that every student who emerges out of here should at least know something about Mandela, beyond simply that he was a hero of struggle, that he spent years in Robben Island. It's really, what is it that made him tick? But what we do is, again, we, instead of bringing the totality of the man who led Umkhonto weSizwe, the man who said there comes a time in the lives of a nation when you have to submit or fight, that the person, that revolutionary, is absent. So the issue is, how do we rewrite those people into? Now, the paper that you will be doing, for those of you who will take this course, will look at the questions that the major traditions in our history that looked at decolonization in different forms. Those who are decolonial scholars, they call it decolonial terms. I prefer to call that moments of heightened political consciousness. I repeat, the moments of heightened political consciousness. And I'll give you a description, just without going through these traditions, give you the example of how the traditions or those moments express themselves in the political struggle in South Africa. When the ANC was formed in 1912, it represented a moment of heightened political consciousness where African leaders simply said, no, today we commit ourselves to the liberation of the continent. Remember, the ANC is the oldest, or that's what we claim, to be the oldest liberation movement in Africa. And there was that decision. And of course, there were other struggles in between. Then in the 20s, you had also the formation of unions, which was also another moment of political consciousness. Then in the 40s, then you had the formation of the Youth League, which was another moment of heightened political consciousness, where the likes of Mandela came into being, the Walter Sisulus, and they felt that this leadership of the ANC is not taking us to the promised land. And what they were saying is that your methods are not working. And in when the Mandela, and you read that in his speech from the dock in the Rivonia Trial, when he was confronted by people like Albert Luthuli. Albert Luthuli said, who of you can deny that 30 years of my life has been spent knocking at the door of the white man? And what has been the fruits of that moderation? And that's when Mandela said, of course, that's a problem. Hence, they increased the tempo of struggle. And Walter Sisulu then to say that we are not going to save our people or liberate our people through deputations, through writing letters. What we need is a mass mobilization of our people. That's when the struggle took a different turn. Then, if you listen to the language of the Mandela's Professor Kasarem, you will find that he talks about the notion of legitimacy. That the government that is not based on the will of the people is an illegitimate government. And so the emphasis with the Mandelas was issue of legitimacy. But when the Bikos came in the 70s, that's another moment of heightened political consciousness. Their argument was that they were questioning even the legality of that government. The whole notion of the right of conquest. They were actually questioning it. That's why Biko was saying we should understand that whatever is done to black people comes from the people who have traveled all the way from foreign lands and to come and claim to be our perpetual masters. And he was questioning that. So did Edmund Jatayuvo in Namibia, raising that question. Actually, one of the books that you must read, especially those who are in law, and actually, is a book called, it's available on the internet, The Sun Shall Rise. It's put in by Mary Benson. In that book, it's all the speeches, well, not most of the speeches of the key figures who were in Robben Island. The Mandela speech, the Sobukwe, the Hemenjatoyevo, the Tokyo Squales. I mean, the very profound speeches in terms of how they were engaging. It is a must read. And I can tell you, if you are to have your students read those books, when they emerge out of UNIZO, they will emerge as people who are ready to fight for justice, who are not simply looking for work, who, even when they don't have a job, they'll be able to use their creative skills to do something for their own communities. And if they do that, then what you are going to have, Professor Dr. Advocate Songoni, it will be saying, we agree with Mandela that we also want to be part of that struggle, the struggle for justice. So what do you then? So I'm giving you that's a more political moment of heightened consciousness. After that, there was another moment of political consciousness during our time in the 70s, when young people in Soweto, in Kailicha, took to the streets. It was not something that some people claim that they imposed on us, but it was a certain moment when there was such consciousness that young people say, we will not tolerate this, and you cannot go further than this. And they took a position. And the program director, another moment that may have been during your time is in 1985, when the ANC declared that we should make South Africa ungovernable and apartheid unworkable. That was another moment of political consciousness. And then after that, then you had 1994 breakthrough. Then you started having other moments of political consciousness, which express themselves in the fees must fall and the roads must fall, where now the issue of decolonialism was now put on the table. But the one that is not spoken about is the moments that we introduced when we were talking about the black perspectives. But unfortunately, those debates were overtaken by the restructuring of higher education, where the focus was no longer on the curriculum. The focus was on the restructuring, more about the institutional arrangements, as opposed to looking at the content of what is there. But now some of the ideological postures that have been taken over time include those, the negritude movement, the Garveyism. Marcus Garvey, who was based in the US and was also betrayed by black people and ended up in jail, was a person who felt that the black people, wherever they are, must unite. It was a global intervention, a planetary response to the condition of black people wherever they are. And then what you had, you also had Nkrumah, who was also a disciple of Marcus Garvey. When he came to Africa, he came up with something called Africa Must Unite, which was more from Garveyism, which was a planetary response. His was a continental response. From an international struggle of African people, he bastardized it and diluted to what I may call continentalism, which I think was a problem. And within African countries, because of the struggles that were taking place, there was what you call national struggles, hence the notion of African nationalism that took place in almost every struggle in the continent. But that itself was also metamorphosed to other forms. Some people like Nyerere talked about African socialism, and here at home Mbeki brought the idea of African Renaissance. But all I'm saying that all these struggles, they had a particular imprint and an approach on what does it mean to move towards a liberation of African people who have been destroyed and whose confidence has been destroyed over the years. So the notion of a decolonial turn, when you get it in the Wasim, is what I call moment of heightened political consciousness. But what of interest to us are the epistemological questions that also arise out of those struggles. Remember, the whole notion of even African nationalism It was also followed by people who said we must create African universities. So you find that the political struggles, there was also a thought process, there was also an ideology that gets attached to that. But what is now being asked in terms of our time is that what are the epistemological questions that arise? And Kacheni, who came here to give a paper, he says the questions that people thought have already been answered are now resurfacing. And that should not be a problem, because as we live, society develops. The things that we thought we understood, the new conditions begin to question whether we understood them properly. I mean, I can speak easily in physics that when we thought Galileo was right, then came Newton. When you thought Newton has solved our problem because we can fly the air like birds, we can swim the seas like fish, then came Einstein, and came other people. And we continue to review our understanding. So to an extent that when we talk about truth, we're talking about something that is simply provisional until there's a better understanding. And yesterday I was talking to people about the book they must also read to empower themselves, because this is going to be an intellectual struggle which is going to be difficult. It's a book by Thomas Kuhn, who was a physicist, but he's more known in philosophy than in physics. He wrote the book The Structure of Scientific Revolution, which is also a must read to understand the concept of paradigm and to understand what it takes to have revolutions. And if we are going to be on this path, you should know that this is a revolutionary struggle of a different kind. So those questions have been raised, and but the long and short of it is, in the words of Kacheni and other people that who came here, is really about shifting the geography of reason. It is about saying the geography of reason is not only restricted to Europe, that there's a reasoning has occurred, and it's also about making sure that we benefit from the geographies. It's also about the biography of reason. It's about who becomes the author. And I can tell you today, it is easier in black universities to prescribe a work written by a white person than for a black person to prescribe a work of a black person. That's a level of absence of social confidence that we have in ourselves. Some of us, our work is used by universities abroad, but not at home, because of what the damage has actually occurred. That only when they discover that a university like Pennsylvania State University used your book, then do they now have the courage, because they are in the business of mimicry. There's no sense of social confidence. This is what colonialism has actually done. So, advocate, I'm not saying you should read my book and prescribe it, but I'm simply saying don't suffer from that challenge that you find. And of course, there's a tradition that started in the US. It's called the Black Radical tradition, and you'll also find that most of the other decolonial trends, they have that in common. And the Black Radical tradition found expression in Harlem Renaissance, Guyism, Pan-Africanism, negritude, Black consciousness, and also African women movements, and also African socialist thought. So you'll find a lot of that. I mean, I should actually make my slides available. But what the Black Radical tradition did is also what the Afrikaners did. They simply said, if these universities like Harvard and all that produce this pseudoscience about us, why can't we start our own universities? And that's where you found African Americans starting their own universities, the Howard universities, the Spelman, those type of institutions, the Morehouse, that came to be. It was simply about responding to the erasure of black people's contribution to history. And of course, I've said a little bit about the various decolonial trends. Within the 60s, you had the Pan-Africanist orientation due to the national liberation movements. Then you had the rise of Marxism. especially when you look at some schools like the Dar School. By the way, the Dar School is the school of a school that was based in Dar es Salaam, and it produced people like Walter Rodney, who wrote the book How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. So these are, I'm just giving you the best eye view of what we should be dealing with when we talk about the decolonization, that we are simply stepping on the footsteps of people who have walked there, and also the formation of Codesria, who are still doing a very interesting work. And the debates that are taking place, for instance, the Ibadan and the Dhaka schools, where some of those that succeeded to demonstrate that Africa has a history beyond simply colonialism. And but the way there was also always a discussion is whether it was a Symbian episode or whether it was epochal, in the sense that it was altering. And of course, the internal quarrels that were there among African people. So even with us, when we embark on this, we must also understand that there will be quarrels that are necessary, and those quarrels are necessitated by where we come from. And Professor Pra then concludes by asking the question, which he finds is that the problem with Africans is that they seem to be intimidated by particular questions. And he says what intimidates us is how do we indigenize knowledge production? How do we domesticate knowledge and its production? The point he's making is that despite understanding this, if you ask Africans to embark on this, they are too afraid. Again, it has to do with the history they come from. Other people will get excited about new areas of study, but it says because we are captives of a planetary cognitive empire that I spoke about, which continues to reproduce intellectual imperialism, which continues to sustain coloniality of knowledge, which is those structures that the VC was talking about that makes it so difficult for you to challenge how things are, where you become so comfortable with the status quo, you become so comfortable with being in the plantation, you become so comfortable in being in prison that you don't want to be free. And then it also is also sustained by how the cognitive empire has shaped the African intellectuals' consciousness. And there are three ways in which Mkanda Riwe talked about it. That part of it has to do with how we trained. And I mentioned that in passing yesterday that some of us got our degrees here and we studied abroad. Some studied abroad and some studied only here. And because of the trajectories they have impacted on us, there are those who are so happy to be in prison, in a colonial prison, that they will fight with you if you want to take them out of prison because they are comfortable there. There are some who want to be on the fence just in case something does not work. And there are some who are radical, who simply want to be changed. But at the same time, this poses very interesting philosophical and intellectual questions that we must deal with. I think I'll leave it here, and later I wanted to talk about Professor Moyo a little bit about the silenced dialogue. I want to talk about literacy for stupidification. I want to talk about linguicide. I wanted to talk about a bit of Frere. So I hope I'll find time to take about 20 minutes or 15 minutes to touch on those big concepts, and also to talk about the privilege. And when you talk about the male privilege and white privilege, then it comes down to what is it that you're doing in the classroom. So, folks, this was supposed to be deliberately a roller coaster of ideas, and but it is simply a curtain raiser, or like in the movies, a trailer to say this is what you should expect when we take this course. And it is trying to take you through 3 months but they take that 3 months in less than 30 minutes or 40 minutes or 50 minutes. I don't know what it is. Thank you.
Another round of applause to Professor Siepe. Well, we are far behind time, but it's not a problem because this is basically what we are here for. Consumption of information. I think there's a lot that we've learned from that time that was lost. So then therefore the time is not lost. We'll just have to find ways of making up for it. There's a lot of things that have transpired today, especially about how decolonization has been in the past century or set of decades. We see that decolonization is not an instant task. As we are here, sometimes it's like watching a Chinese movie. You watch a Chinese movie, they are doing karate, and then after coming out of that movie, you think that you can practice karate and beat anyone. When in actual fact, that won't happen. So then therefore, but it feels good to be a foundation of the continuation of decolonization, even though we know that it won't end with us. We have to play our part and then pass the baton to the next generation to continue with decolonization. As we have heard that in the 1920s, the struggle was mostly with the trade unions who were fighting a certain aspect of decolonization, which was in the workplace. Then in the 1940s, we get that there were also some youngsters who had their revolution of trying to fight decolonization. So that was also another aspect. And also they did not finish because also in the 1970s, specifically in 1976, we had a group of youth who also were fighting basically what partly the youth in the 1940s were fighting. So it doesn't end because colonization has been with us for close to 500 years, if not more. So it's not something that you can undo instantly. I won't say because of time, because we've already lost time. At least today is a short day, so we will find means of replacing that time. And also there was a lot of things that were touched on. Just going through my notes, just that I have a 3 days worth of notes. And also there's categories of notes in my notebook. Okay, I'm looking for this one. So there's new concepts that we got exposed to today. The epistemicide, if that's the correct word of the way of pronouncing it. So Professor Siepe basically says that that's the denial of the existence of African civilization. Like 2 days ago, we spoke of the fact that sometimes it is difficult to differentiate between civilization and colonization because those who colonized us are the ones also who brought in civilization. So as a result, when we touch on colonization, people say, no, but that's civilization. It's not colonization. So we have a role to play as people who wish to decolonize ourselves, of trying to resuscitate the existence of African civilization. So there's a lot that has been said, and also it has been incorporated with some suggestions from yesterday's reflectors. Also culture. Professor Aya yesterday spoke about culture, that our law also need to incorporate our own indigenous law. So that's also very important in decolonization. Also, we need to tackle existential challenges, and also we need to look around in the discussions that will follow in the next session. We need to look at the silent dialogue. How do we go about maybe identifying it and resuscitating it, and also look at literacy for stupidification. I think during the discussions we'll get to know what that means, and a lot of other things as well. So we are now proceeding on to roundtable reflections from Professor Kuzwayo, Ms. Mate, as well as Professor Keseram. Because of time, I'm not saying that I'm limiting what they are saying, but may they try to summarize, some sort of summarize, so that we keep up with the time. Because there's lunches and all, sometimes you can't shift the schedule for tea or lunch. So can we give a round of applause to Professor Kuzwayo as she comes forward?
Good morning, Professor Siepe, our guest presenter, and Professor Moyo, the pioneer of this work in our institution, and colleagues. I'm not going to be long. Although I'm a teacher, I know that I can take long, but today I promise I won't be long. From the first day's presentation by Professor Siepe and Professor Moyo and Professor Akpume, I have picked up some of the things that my division should take up and move forward with. So from what they've presented, I started to visualize or have that image of a framework or a paradigm that we should start working with. So that is going to guide our operation from now moving forward. So I am taking what they've said as a challenge and a thought-provoking presentation or presentations, because what Professor Siepe has reiterated today regarding the key issues that we need to consider when we do our curriculum renewal is to make sure that we first start by unmasking what we want to deal with, like the Eurocentric perspectives that are dominant in our epistemes or discipline epistemes. So which in curriculum language, we talk of this as a review. So you start whenever you have to do a curriculum renewal. Most of the models say you have to start by reviewing to see what is it that you want to focus on when changing that particular curriculum. And also Professor Siepe talked about the reverse the erasure of other perspectives, which means anything that you will consider in your module as an impediment to colonialization or bringing other perspectives. You have to think seriously about taking that thing out or finding ways of the redress of such imbalances, bias, or prejudice that you identify in that particular area of knowledge. I undoing the distortion, the misconception, and misinterpretations. You know, as Professor Siepe has said, that most of the content that is written about Africa is written about them without them. So which means there is a gap there which we need as academics to fill in our own ways, in our own pedagogical approaches. So, and also, yeah, undoing the distortion, which means we need to look into that as well. So I think that we have, as academics, engaged in our reading with different ways of analyzing knowledge. From what I have read from this discipline of curriculum development and theories, is that if you want to shift from one paradigm, you cannot just shift to a vacuum. So we need to establish what paradigm do we want to frame our thinking or our new thinking in. So the paradigm that I have actually seen coming more is the critical paradigm of curriculum review. So if we are to adopt this paradigm, we need to have more workshops into unpacking it to see how it can fit into our project of decolonizing our curriculum or our module content. And taking this from, and I'm linking this or relating what I'm saying now to what the VC said in her presentation. Actually, I have been taken up by most of the things that she said because I really believe in them. The model of knowledge production, that there are so many theories. You may think of a legitimating theory of Mayton, where they support this knowledge coding, that if you code the knowledge, you must think about the knower and the knowledge. So, and then they start to say there is an ER and the SR, and then you have to weigh. I think maybe when we have a workshop, we are going to see, when we evaluate our module content, to see where is the emphasis, where is your emphasis in the ER. Is it on the ER, the epistemic relations, epistemic relations, or it is on the social relations? So we need to look at these two main important aspects in knowledge. So we are going to look into that when we do our reviews. So which means in our workshop, we have to go through these theories to see how do we move from legitimating codes to a more relaxed kind of approach in knowledge structuring. And from what the VC say, talk about the mosaic in knowledge production. So if we are going to have this kind of knowledge, it means we are moving from model one kind of knowledge, which is more disciplinary based knowledge, into multidisciplinary knowledge of Gibson, where he talks about a repertoire of knowledge that will assist learners or enable our students to address situations, problematic situations that they confront in real life situation. Not just to be specialists, because if they are just specialists and experts, sometimes that does not work in real life or in solving real life problems. So even in our, okay, let me just touch on what we need to do moving forward, is to conceptualize an implementation plan where we have to come up with a model. How are we going to cascade these thoughts? Because thought is just, a creation of some kind of philosophy. So we are also going to do a lot of things around this one, because we need to know where do we start, how do we start, and how do we determine our destination, where we'll say this is the criteria for our standard. And And also, I so wish that when we take this into the real practical sense, we look at what we call the psychology of concept mapping, because every knowledge starts with concept before it becomes a conceptual knowledge. So if we understand this issue of how concepts are developed and how they expand to form the conceptual knowledge. So they would be dealing with this legitimating codes, moving to mode 2, which the Vice Chancellor talked about. And also, because I said I will be very short, the very important thing that I don't want to sit down having not mentioned is the graduate attributes. Colleagues, this presentation as actually should have influenced how we think about our graduate attributes. There's so many models that we can use this very same presentation or this agenda to make sure that our graduate attributes talks to what we want to see at the end. So if we want to see change, we want to see students who are going to be initiators, people who are going to get into some initiatives, which means in terms of the legitimating, Bernstein theory, so social theory, you will be saying the knowledge should be enabling. If the knowledge is not enabling somebody to do something, then that is what Paulo Freire calls a banking knowledge. So not every knowledge should be applicable. I think DHET has come up with a very good structure of organizing content in or teaching content in higher education, where they give us 3 competences. Your teaching should be guided, or your learning outcomes or module outcomes should be guided by these 3 competences: the foundational competence, the knowledge that is supposed to underpin that practice. So the next one should be the practical knowledge, practical competence, where the knowledge should be enabling. And then the last one is reflexive competence. So in terms of Bernstein theory, I'll be saying it's more on the plus, on the ES, or on the epistemic, social relation, where a person can relate knowledge to different contexts and to be versatile in terms of thinking, not just to be stereotyped, to say, if I'm economist, I'll always be economist. But the world is so vast with so many challenges that does not actually require somebody with only one specialist knowledge, but we need to be more versatile. So, those are the things, colleagues, that I think from my division, what I'll be taking and working on from what Professor Moye and Professor Brown has produced as our conceptual document. So I'm going to use it because there are some, the mandate for this division. I have to take this thing into the real implementation. So we cannot then do that without consulting you, faculties, to say what kind of a model do you think will be suitable for us to expedite this thing, to see this thing working, because it cannot be just a talk shop. It should get us into working to see to it that it is really achieved. And our teaching and learnership scholarship for academics, I think, should start with action plan. What are you doing? Are you doing it according to maybe theory? Is it working? Is it not working? Which theory is more appropriate? So without further ado, Program Director, thank you for your time.
Another round of applause for Professor Khuzwayo. Too much information in a very short space of time, especially about the change in our curricula. Prof. Khuzwayo touches on the what has been touched by Professor Siepe of the undoing the distortions that have been done by colonization. And also she touches on the establishment of a new paradigm so that we don't move to a vacuum, because if you are undoing something, if you are decolonizing, then you should have something in place that you need to put. If you are taking something from a baby, he or she will cry. You have to give something else. Like, for instance, these days infants like phones. If you are taking a phone, your cell phone, from an infant, you need to have something to give back. Otherwise, you'll have a crying baby for the rest of the day. So that's basically what she's saying, that we need not to move into a vacuum, so that, because if we move to a vacuum, we will have doubt. Some will say, colonization system was better. Here we have nothing. And then we'll go back, because if you are decolonizing, remember, we are also decolonizing ourselves, because we still have doubts. And also, knowledge production, it needs to be structured. That's what she says. And also, she emphasizes that teaching should entail competencies. She made mention of 3 competencies. And also, it should be versatile. It should be allowing various ways or various information to come in. So without any further reflection on a reflection, let us proceed to a reflection from Miss Mate. Can we give her a round of applause?
Thank you very much, Program Director, to Prof. Siepe, and a very good morning to you, Prof. Moyo, and to all the colleagues. I must say, this is a very uncomfortable topic to reflect on. I think from what, Prof, you have shared on the first day when we attended, the issues of self-doubt, And when I heard that I have to reflect on this topic, I started doubting myself and the concepts or the ideas that I've heard. But doing the reflection, I reflected, maybe put it in two ways. I reflected on the knowledge that you shared with us in the past 3 days, but also I reflected on my behavior in the past 3 days after I have heard what you shared with us. And I realized that from the first day, I've started having sleepless nights thinking about this. My study is not the same at home. My office is not the same at home, with papers all over, going through the presentations that you have done this week, even the ones before, because that was so stimulating. And it was interesting for me to start realizing that I have a scholarship that I can pin my ideas to, because these ideas were already existing in my mind in terms of how can we transform the library, but not also transform it in a way that we make it more Western, but also keep the African part of it, which is not something that most people look into. People are trying to become more global and more Westernized. But I didn't know how to position my arguments around this type of transformation that I want to do in the library. And this has become some sort of an insight on how I can position all the initiatives that we are trying to do in the library to transform how libraries have been. So you have shared a lot of resources that we should actually purchase in the library, and we are going to do that, and we are quite excited that you are going to assist us with that, because you said you have the library of your own. But also, I have started realizing how much reading myself I need, not only thinking about what colleagues need to read, because, decolonizing starts with self. That's what you shared in the quotation that you shared with us with Bigo. How do we decolonize ourselves first before we start thinking of decolonizing everything else that is linked to us? So I've realized that we need to read a lot, and we will be purchasing a lot of resources, and we'll open a section in the library that will be focusing on the Node for African Thought, with literature that will be housed there. We have a special collection called Uzulu Collection, but we will repurpose that collection not only to say Uzulu, but looking broadly at the issues of African literature and the issues of decolonization. So the other issue that I want to share, which was part of my reflection, I was looking at how much knowledge has been shared around this here at UniZulu, and this is our intellectual property. How do we then own this intellectual property and make it ours before people get into all these YouTube spaces and steal the content without us licensing it properly and own it? So I thought that the library can take a position there in assisting in this transition, making sure that whatever that we are sharing through these platforms, going through workshops and presentations. I mean, you've done a lot of work in your presentation, but how do we license that work so that when people want to use it, then they use it correctly and we ethically claim it as UniZulu. So that's the contribution that we will be making in the library. And also conscientizing researchers about the issue of publishing with power, that researchers can still claim their author rights. You don't have to give them away to the publishers, because that's why we found ourselves in this argument or in this problem of having big publishers owning our content and we have to buy it back while that content is created by us. So we need to make sure that we look into the issues of empowering each other in terms of how do we own or how do we retain what we have written and make sure that it resides within our own territories and not give it away to the publishers. And so most of you, I believe that you have heard more about the global move on open access. People talk about open access and the benefits that are attached to publishing open access, but we have had also arguments about people not believing in open access publishing. And I think that is also something that we need to work on in terms of decolonizing our mind towards the issues of open access. I know that there are predatory journals, but we can put some structures and systems that will monitor the quality of the journals that are open access and not really shy away from publishing open access and making sure that the content is accessible freely to everyone who wants to use it. But what has fascinated me also when I looked at the issues of open access, we get excited about these, it comes from the library discussions about transformative agreements that we are signing with publishers. And my biggest question that I've always had, but I cannot pin it to any scholarship, was, is it really transformative? Because the whole idea about transformative agreement is to transition a certain proportion of outputs into open access. And we have to engage with publishers on these agreements, negotiating these agreements. But my worry is that if you still negotiate with the publisher, you have not taken yourself out of the status quo, because the publishers will always continue to craft the negotiations to favor the colonial. So if you are still thinking around the issues of agreements, transformative agreements, and even creating the terminologies that act as if there is transformation going on while there is no transformation, that also is a challenge. We have seen some movements on these transformative agreements starting from the University of California, which decided to pull out of an agreement with the biggest publisher, Science Direct. It's all over in the internet. It's not something hidden. And they pulled out of the agreement because they couldn't agree with the model that the publishers are using, which does not drive open access to content. But what is amazing, Prof, is that we see this movement, the stance taken by University of California, and then after they have taken that stance, then everybody starts to move. What really made us not to take a stance in terms of our position, not really buying into the model that the publishers are using? We have been talking about it under carpet, but we have not been confident enough to voice that problem, which is what it's something that we still need to do to deal with. But this you see more in the US, where libraries are taking their positions in pulling away from these subscriptions, firm positions. And I have gone through a list starting from 2009, looking at the trends and the patterns of institutions that have pulled away. And it's big institutions. And if you try to do that here at UniZulu to pull away, you'll start having researchers saying to that, where am I going to publish? I can't read. And it's not true. There are many ways that we need to explore, which brings the issue of innovation, that we need to explore in terms of broadening access to content, but not using the colonial models in terms of accessing that content. So how do we then bring those innovative ways? We have to work on ourselves and broadening our understanding about colonial models that keep on oppressing us in terms of changing and innovating our spaces and accessing content in different models. There is open access movement, it's a global movement, but the business models that are attached to it, are they in favor of the conditions that are facing Africa? They might not be. So we also need to look at that. Even on the list of the people that have pulled out, do you see any African university that has taken a position? None. You have not seen none. And if you try to raise that voice, you're like, how can you do that? How can you pull away from this publisher? And there's so much noise that stands against what you are trying to push in terms of dismantling these colonial models that are really about the market share. And they are really not about spreading the knowledge as much as we would want to spread it. We have, Prof, you have spoken about the issues of, with the ideas, they generate from a problem. And the problem starts from where you are. In libraries, it's a long concept of sharing literature amongst the universities, not only nationally, but globally. You spoke about the experience you had on COVID when researchers were sharing information. That's a standard practice that has been there in libraries for a long time. But with colonial powers, they have seen that if we accelerate this model of sharing, it will take away the power of getting money from subscriptions, and they have dampened the power of sharing and increased the power and the importance of subscription to an extent that they have influenced the system to make sure that the system, when you publish, even your ad hominem promotions must be linked to the publications that are coming from there. So we need to look at this in a very broader context, because if we make these changes in the library, what is the causal relationship of the decisions that I will making to the tenor? So we need to identify these salient issues and create causal relationship, and then come up with solutions that will work for UniZulu. It's a complex exercise to do, but I'm just sharing on what is happening in the library environment. And I'm sure that since this is going to be published online, I will be receiving backlashes and, questioning my position in terms of dismantling, these models that some of our bodies that we are part of, they have mimicked what the other universities in the States have been doing, and which doesn't work for us. Especially with the transformative agreements, you find that we are paying for subscription, but also there is also the issue of APCs. It's even more market share that they have opened for themselves, but naming that under the umbrella of transformative agreements. Is it transformative? So we need to engage on that. And what I picked up when I was reflecting on this, there was a reading that says, for as long as the big deal approach, which is the subscription approach, is maintained, legendary publishers will continue to negotiate the conditions that guarantee their market share. So, taking this position as UniZulu, we need to conscientize ourselves in terms of how do we dismantle this and communicate our position quite clearly with an understanding of what decolonization is and what the colonial structures created many years ago. And if we cannot do a lot of reading around this and then align it to the problems that we are experiencing, we will never be impactful in the exercise that we intend to do. Also, this for me, I thought even harder, though it can take very long to discuss. But this filters down also to our processes, our policies in the institution. It filters down to the structure, because we have to review even our library structures and bringing up new skills that will enable us to facilitate all that we want to change. Now, the issue that is important for me is how do we then take advantage of these digital technologies that are out there to accelerate what we are trying to do here. As much as we are decolonizing, we won't be moving away from the reality that the digital transformation is happening around the world, and we can take advantage of those technologies to push our own agenda. So how can we converge all those technologies to make sure that we drive the agenda properly and it becomes in fact impactful globally? Thank you.
Another round of applause to Ms. Zwane. Quite a mouthful. It is rare that when we are at a workshop that already there is action being proposed, that you see that it's guaranteed that the action is going to take place. We usually say that at the end of each workshop that, oh, now we are going back to the drawing board and see what we can do. But I can see others are already talking about action. This is what we are going to do and so forth, which means that this workshop is really fruitful and the results are already coming. And hopefully most of us will be talking about what are we going to do since this is the final day. And also, I feel guilty to show people that your time is up, because I'm also listening and I'm also learning, and I see the information that they are delivering is very important, which means that we need more of this in future, because decolonization is very broad. It doesn't need to be in a form of workshop only, but it can be a lifelong practice that each year we have these particular sessions. I'm so happy that Prof. Sepe has said that there's going to be a 3 to 6 months course. I think we really need this. Before any further waste of time, we'll have our last reflector before we break for tea and come back for group discussions. Can we give a round of applause to Professor Kesram as he comes forward?
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for allowing me here on this platform. I feel humbled for many reasons, but to start off with, the outstanding presentations by Prof. Kuzawayo and Ms. Mate, and that makes it even more difficult for me. I feel like a student who hasn't done his homework, and so now I have to come here and stand before you. But first and foremost, I feel I should be standing there and not here, is because I was actually sitting here. You didn't know, but I was there. It seemed I was there, but I was sitting at your feet, bro. It's because the wisdom that you shared with us is a lifetime's work. Your rich experience, both within South Africa and abroad, the people that you met, your insights. You know, there's this one saying that in Africa, our elders are our library. And that's what we experienced here. We experienced a lifetime of library collection. And towards the end of your presentation, Prof, you said you mentioned the different times of the moments of political consciousness. And you mentioned Mandela and the legitimation of the African people. You mentioned Steve Biko, who brought in the whole notion of black consciousness. You mentioned the ungovernability. You mentioned that fees must fall. And this decoloniality project that has been introduced here since 2022 is another moment of that political consciousness. And I'm proud to be a student in that moment. It harkened me back to 40 years ago when I was learning about things like conscientize, mobilize, organize. And these are the key phrases that political activists of that time learned. We needed to first conscientize ourselves before we can mobilize people, before we can organize them into in something that's important. It's an existential requirement of us who find offensive things that are oppressive, things that are unjust, and we need to take a stand. And so this is what we are called for here. We are called to take a stand in our positions as academics, as the purveyors of knowledge. We are called to do the next right thing, and that is to be loyal to our students. And if you look at who are our students, they are the ones that Prof. CFA has been talking about. They are the future generation that cannot perpetuate the injustices of the past that reverberates into the present and may continue to reverberate into the future if we do nothing. And so I like when Prof. CFA mentioned about, I don't know whether he was talking about Thatcher, when one of her ministers talked about, I feel, this is my feeling about something. And she said, it's not about feeling. Tell me, what are your ideas? And so we got a lot of wonderful ideas of what is the problem? How do we, what we need to do to address the problem so that the lives that matters are addressed. We talked about the center. Where am I? I'm here in, well, today we're here at the Premier Hotel, but my location is KwaZulu-Natal. What's my positionality? My positionality is I'm an African with Asian descent. And I'm part of two great heritages, the African heritage and the Asian heritage. I find it strange that, or curious, that you say, okay, firstly, I come from a scientific background. And so as a scientist, we look for evidence. So I'm talking about now things that are related to genetic evidence. So the genetic evidence suggests that the cradle of humanity is Africa. And people from Africa, thousands of years ago, migrated and populated the rest of the world. And so we are one family. But because of the gap in time and space, it is the same, our relatives that have come back to create all these challenges that were so eloquently spoken about. And now it is our duty again to address this. And so when Prof. Siepe was speaking about this whole, to my mind, it can be, and many people spoke about it, it can be addressed in, it can be summarized into three forms. The first one is, well, it is written differently. This is a powerful book, and Prof. Moyo said that we need to read read. And a number of people emphasize that. So despite my busy schedule, I try to read. And so anyway, what I found very interesting was the coloniality of being. This is number C on page 17 of this book. Equates to what Prof. Siepe says, the Eurocentric negation of African people. And he spoke about what Chinua Achebe said, and I won't quote it exactly what he said, but in essence, his history is written by the victors. And so, that is the whole issue about the negation of African people that come with the history, with knowledge. And as I said, so when I say that people came out of Africa, what that means, the first knowledge, the first science, the first insight about humanity, about spirituality, all came from Africa, because we really want. And so because it happened so far back in time, the mist of time has faded our memories. And so it is, but anyway, I won't go there now, but let me come back to this point. I tend to digress a lot when I'm not prepared. And so, yeah, so the second important point was the coloniality of knowledge. And so it's an erasure of, and the silencing of African people's voices. And this is where epistemicide, that was spoken about so eloquently today, comes in. And it is where people feel unworthy. We feel that we're inferior, that we need to aspire towards something that's not us. And hence, Chinua Ali Muzroi spoke about the cultural schizophrenia that black people face. But it is much broader than that. It is in South America, it is in India, it is the same problem. But I understand when Prof. Siepe was speaking about black people in specific, because it's about center, where we are located. And then the third problem is about the fundamental coloniality, which is undoing the distortions of African people. And so it's about the existential crisis, why what Du Bois said, that black people are seen as a problem. And why is it? It is about distorting the history, it's about distorting the economics, about the sociology and all of that. And so all these things needs to be addressed. So coming back to the whole issue of ideas, that I don't know how I lost that moment, but anyway, I think it was Margaret Thatcher that spoke about, that ideas must be converted into words, and that is our task. Essentially what Prof. Siepe did was he summarized what we need to do. We've learned all these valuable ideas, now we need to convert it into words, into policies, into writing, which leads to action. Then we need to take action, we need to apply it in our classroom settings, and then which is going to shape our habits and the habits of our students. And Prof. Moyo yesterday spoke about where we have to engage with the students, the dialogical pedagogy. That's what Prof. I may be using the words incorrectly, but essentially that's what Prof. Moyo spoke about. And that will shape the character, and that will impact on our destiny. And our destiny as a people, we have vested interest. I have vested interest in South Africa, and I want South Africa to be a prosperous nation, because my future is at stake, my old age is at stake, my retirement is at stake. And so, yeah, and so how do we do it? And there's variable information here. It's like Prof. Moyo and Prof. Brown were like revolutionaries putting this information together. And so what they said was that we need to, you must have heard of, I think it was Sabelo Gacheni, Ndlovu Gacheni, that said we have to learn to unlearn in order to relearn. So we have to go through this epiphany. It's a major reorientation of how we think, live, and believe. And so, Prof. So the model that's on page 18 is about, first we have to unfreeze. Unfreeze means we have to reflect on a lot has been said, and so we need to say, how has my thinking been affected by coloniality? And in many big ways, it has been affected, you know. And so now, how do I make the change? How do I transform? And this is where I need to think about my job as an academic, as a lecturer, as a manager. And it talks about change management. It talks about being, so there are many very sort of activists, revolutionary phrases used about insurgent, about epistemological disobedience. It's about transgression and transcendence. So this is what it calls for. It's we don't know how to go about doing it because no one has thus far successfully achieved it. But we have we can rely on the giants. We can stand on the shoulders of the giants that Prof. Siepe spoke about that have attempted it in the past, and we can build on that. And so what in this book, a lot has been said or has been outlined that we have these institutions. We have teaching and learning, we have research, we have the institutional planners and the library and all these various entities that we need to work together. We need to work together to make this possible. Prof. Siepe spoke about a course that we can take on. I was trying to listen carefully, is it a compulsory course? But it doesn't seem like it's compulsory. It seems like if you're going to do it, but it might be compulsory for managers. And I would like to advocate that it should be compulsory for managers at least. And so, yeah, and so we have a major task, a life-changing task, a historical moment, because this is all about a revolution, and a revolution to transform society so it's a better place for all of us to live in. And if this revolution succeeds, or I shouldn't say if it succeeds, when this revolution succeeds, it will inspire other peoples around the world who are facing similar challenges. But remember that what Prof. Siepe was saying about the coloniality of knowledge is about material realities. It's about those who are in power. They pervade certain ideas, etc., to maintain that power. And those that are in power are not the majority, not the 8 billion people. They're a small percentage of the 8 billion people. So what I'm saying is even those who might identify with those that are in power, they themselves need healing. They themselves need to be educated. So we must see this as a revolutionary moment for us to transform so that our future generations would be able to thrive and stand proud to shape world thinking. I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
Another round of applause. Thank you very much to Professor Kesaram. He emphasizes the fact that we need to stand on the shoulders of giants. So basically today's topic is about that, learning from those who practice decolonization of knowledge in the past. So now, how do we stand on the shoulders of giants? Because the giants are no more. It's only through reading, as Prof. Moyo would emphasize, that we need to read. It is only through reading that we are able to tap into the struggle that has been there as far as colonization is concerned. Because of time, I'm going to change the program a bit. As the program director, I'm going to redirect the program. We are supposed to have a question and answer session before tea, but now because the time for tea has long passed, can we quickly grab tea in the next 10 minutes? You can either come with it here or quickly try to finish in 10 minutes, and then so that we come back for the question and answer session. Maybe there's somehow that we will couple the question and answer session with group discussion. I think there'll be very few questions because now it is reflecting from the speakers that everyone is now agreeing we are on the same page. Maybe also before we break for tea, I've been seeing messages since morning. Let's check if, it's only good morning, colleagues. Good morning. Okay, there's Mrs. Kwenan who says, thanks, Prof, for this session. It answers the question I have kept for ages, where I ask myself, why do we see it necessary to send our children to previously advantaged universities instead of creating our own? Let's go down. This shows the need to regain our self-confidence. Same applies to educators who send their own children to other schools instead of enrolling them in the schools where they work. It is in this setting where we have people who are too black to be white and too white to be black. Academics can write. This further adds on what has been referred to as cultural bomb in Prof. Sepe's presentation. So can we give a round of applause for the comment? It's the ideas that come about because of these engagements from the reflectors and also from Prof. CF's presentation and from the discussions that transpire from all of us. So the time now is around 10 past 11. If we can resume at 20 past 11, that would be great. Thank you. Isiphelile breakfast. Ngathi usabambeleke buye ngikhohle ukume kwi-position right. Oh, okay. I would like to welcome everyone from T. We are still waiting for others to come back from T. Just waiting for a few colleagues to come back from T. Now that everyone is back from T and is settled, we are proceeding on to our question and answer session, which is now after T. As per your program, is supposed to be before T, but because of time constraint, we had to reschedule or rearrange. We are going to have a question and answer session, and then afterwards we'll have a group discussion session, which will be basically on what I will share when we come to that item, and also on what lesson can be learned for the decolonization of knowledge production at the University of Zululand. Then after that, we'll have a rounding off by Prof. Moyo, and then afterwards we'll have a response. It's not on your program, but as the program director, I'm now putting it on your program. Prof. Yepe will give us a response. And also, since this is our final day where we are wrapping up the workshop, we'll have Prof. Grayling giving us a vote of thanks, then we will close. So I've asked our technical team to have a roving mic. I'm not sure whether Prof. Matadi would like to come to the front to present your question, or you will do it from there. Oh, okay, she's coming to the front. Our first question is from Prof. Matadi. Can we give a round of applause as the
Good morning. I know we are still morning, and my question is directed to Prof. Siepe, Prof. Moyo. Any professor can answer this particular question. Okay, I know while we are living here, we have three terminologies that we will keep and try to unpack at our levels. Okay, it's coloniality of powers, coloniality of knowledge, and coloniality of being, as it is stated in the book, as well as Prof. Kasiram mentioned it as well. Okay, my first question is, our identity or our sense of self is shaped by various external factors, such as the society, interpersonal connections, historical context, and institutional structures. Okay, so Prof. Siepes and all the professors, I believe that you have undergone transformation of mindset and shaped your identity. Could you perhaps pinpoint the moment when you felt prepared to shift your perspective and amplify your voice of overcoming the colonial mindset? Okay, that's the first question. And then the second question is that to all the professors or anyone as well, I would like to hear your views or perspectives on these two important issues that is happening not only in South Africa, but all over Africa. That is the reality, and we cannot deny it. So by asking those questions, first I would like to put on a disclaimer that you can hear from my accent, everyone said so. Where are you from? Because of the accent, okay? A disclaimer is that I'm not rejected at UniZulu due to the fact that I'm from another African country. So I never felt the discrimination, neither from my colleagues or my students. So I feel at home at UniZulu. But then the reality is now what is putting out there for everyone. I would like to hear your perspective about this intra-community discrimination among Black people first. So by that I refer to Black phobia. So where Black people themselves harbor or developed this distrust or resentment towards each other. That is an internal one first. And then the second one is the Afrophobia. The Afrophobia where an African from another country distrust or resent another African person or individual. So we're talking about Africanism, Pan-Africanism, Renaissance, negritude, you name it. So it's time to shift our minds. So I will need your perspective in that. Senior professors, I'm just a young professor, 4 months since I've been promoted as a professor. I thank you.
It's written Dr. Matadi on the program. She's indeed Professor Matadi, fresh from the box. Can we have another question? There are 2 roving mics. If you are shy to come forward, you can ask from where you are.
Hi, good morning. My question is, what practical learnings can we get from, if I looked at 2 countries, Jamaica and Singapore, they became independent in 1962. Jamaica followed the Rastafarian approach or indigenous approach. Singapore followed the Western approach. And how do they fare? Or did it improve the GDP or the advancement of society as a whole? And also a third country, Japan, when they followed a hybrid approach where they kept the culture but followed the Deming's 14-point plan. There's some comments on those 3 countries. Thank you.
Did the professors get the question or the room? Oh, okay. And then can we have
No,
the last?
we didn't. No, we didn't.
Oh. Or is it because of the microphone, or can you come for and just summarize the question? Or and the name, can you kindly say your name first before you?
Thank you. My name is Lionel Munsami. I'm from the Department of Law. I'd just like to know the thinking behind three countries. Jamaica and Singapore received independence in 1962, and they followed some different routes or different pathways. Jamaica followed a more indigenous Rastafarian approach. Singapore followed a more westernized approach, and the result of that on their cultures. And also Japan, where Japan followed a more hybrid approach. They kept the culture, but followed the Deming's 14-point plan. So that's my essence of my question. Thanks.
Okay, that's the second question. Can I have one more question for this first set? Then we allow the response. Is there any other question? Yes, Mr. Bteles, can you kindly come forward? Introduce yourself first, then the question.
I'm Michael Buthelezi from the Department of Law. I've got two questions for Professor Siepe. First, the question is, what role, Professor Siepe, do you see the Department of Higher Education playing in assisting universities like ours achieving this objective that you want to attain? And then the other one, if Prof. Siepe, you were the Minister for Higher Education, what would you do in assisting universities, especially for those previously disadvantaged, to decolonize education or higher education?
So that was the first set of questions directed to Professor Siepe and all the other professors, and there were also some questions directed to the rest of us. We can answer them in any order. Can the first respondent come afore? Mm-hmm.
Not the other professor, Moyo.
Okay. The question which by Matadi, yes. You asked about a moment when we felt we were transformed. I would say my perspective is that really this is an ongoing transformation. Is not, although you can have an aha moment when you read something, a concept, when you understand, you remember what I said yesterday. You can read a concept, you understand, you say, this is what it means, you know? But when you revisit it, or when you juxtapose that concept with other concepts, you find that you revise your previous understanding. So in other words, I would say, I wouldn't talk of a moment. I'll talk of an ongoing, lifelong transformation. That's what I would say. And that's how I understand decolonization as a lifelong process of learning and change and transformation. If you look for a moment, I don't think you are going to get it. I don't think you're going to say, yes, at 12 o'clock, I was transformed, you know. I'm not sure whether I should say this, you know. I was born in a Christian family, you know. We used to go to church. And the preachers used to say, okay, God is talking to you now. You can, you know, you can hear something in your heart. And I listen, I didn't experience that moment. Then I would blame myself to say, hey, maybe I'm such a terrible person, you know. Because umfundisi uthi yena you know umoya oyingcwele uyakhuluma khona manje, you know. And when I try to look for it, I don't find it. You see, so then the second thing is the Afrophobia issue. You can say Afrophobia, racism. I think it's you know, all those characteristics or perspectives, they need to be what can I say? I feel sorry for them. When I don't want to sound like a have-been Prof. Siepe. When I did my advanced level in the UK, I was coming from Rhodesia, where there was white supremacy. And I was really afraid to say, hey, now I'm in a class with whites only. Even afraid to write an essay. But as time went on, you write an essay, you find you are scoring even higher than them. Then you begin to say, hey, so slowly you begin to gain confidence. And you say, how? So we are not different after, and then later they come and ask certain things from you. You know? But what I'm trying to say here is that if you are a colonized mind, anything which is not sanctioned by Western standards or yardstick is not okay. I mean, it's not okay. Ian Smith, or even apartheid South Africa, used to say, the countries to the north of us, we do not want to be like the countries to the north of us. And unfortunately, because of colonialism, you found that independence did not bring about decolonization. That is a fact. Independence did not bring about decolonization. Actually, independence brought about an opportunity for the elite, for the political elite, to jump onto the shoes of the former oppressor, and in some cases oppress you more than the white person. And therefore, the idea that countries to the north of us, because they are underdeveloped, is part of self-hate. It's part of the coloniality of being. You know? Why would I say, because you are from Ghana, you must be inferior to me as a South African? On what basis is that? There is no basis at all. The attitude I take is sympathy. As an educator, the attitude I take is to engage and educate. You know? Even racism. If someone is a racist, I stand my ground and take that person as a person, so that that person can see that I am also a person, a human being. So xenophobia may be violent or whatever, but our job is to educate, is to conscientize. I think that's where that's where our role is. I think I should add here and then leave the harder questions to Prof. Siepe.
A round of applause from Prof. Moyo. I said the other professors because the questions asked, any professor can answer the question. So I wasn't referring to Prof. Moyo. Okay. Yes. Yeah, can we give a round of applause to Prof. Siepe as he comes forward?
I'll respond to the questions differently. Professor Moyo said one of the most important characteristics of being a scholar is reading. I'll ask you to read the last speech that Nelson Mandela gave when he stepped down in Parliament. He made the following statement, that to the extent that I've achieved what I have achieved, it is because of the ordinary masses of our people. To the extent that I've achieved what I've achieved, it is because of ordinary workers of this country. To the extent that I've achieved what I've achieved, it is because I'm a member of the African National Congress. To the extent that I've achieved what I've achieved, it is because of the role that the international community had played in our struggle. But what he was simply saying is exactly what Professor Moyo was saying, that there isn't a moment, but it is also about the continuous engagement and also an element of curiosity. I've reviewed the book called The Subversion of South Africa. In it, there's a statement that I quote Sobukwe to have said about Mandela. He says, I never knew Mandela, but what I discovered about him is that he was an arrogant man, and he liked putting people down, and especially with those people who are weak. And he could not do that to me. And but what you get from Sobukwe is that he never liked the man. And if you talk to people like Winnie Mandela, they will tell you that when they watched Julius Malema, they saw an element of Mandela in his early days. But the man that we came to know was far different from the man that Sobukwe described, that also Winnie described as a man who will go to the meetings. And when people say things that he doesn't like, he disrupts the meetings. But he had gone through a process of conversion, a maturity, and ultimately became one of the men imbued with amazing wisdom. The wisdom of Mandela was even much greater when he was actually pushed in a corner. And one of those moments is when he was going through a sense of pain. And Mishwe, who's a member of the opposition, stood up and said, you, Mandela, in Parliament, you are a disgrace. Go back to your wife. And at that time, Mandela was separating with a mother of his own children. And the members of the ANC, Mandela says you could see that they wanted to jump. They could actually almost strangle Reverend Mishwe. But Mandela said, please leave Mishwe, the Reverend, alone. But there is nothing that Reverend Mishwe will take away from who I am. I'll still be Mandela. But that is how profound Mandela had become. But what you see when you read the stories about him, you see a lot of transformation. But it is through that level of engagement. So there are never really moments, although there will be something that will click, that says, no, but now I understand. And some of us, we are also beneficiaries of having been part of moments in South African history. I'm a product of 1976. I happen to have friends who went into exile. And one of them actually came to speak and wrote a book. And the book is a very interesting book. It says they planted us. More about planted the emotions, their spirit. He wrote it, and when I read the book, I wrote the foreword of the book. It's a person I've known for many years, but I also discovered that I did not know him as I read it. But the point is, having been a product of struggle, there are certain things that come to you, especially when some of the people that you in your class end up being killed. You learn something. But there are also benefits that some of us had is to also meet the what people call stalwarts. And it is through those people that we're able to deal with things like Afrophobia. I had the benefit of working for 10 years as an advisor to a minister whose father was in Robben Island. And when you listen to her talk about moments when she thought she should be happy, she would always remember that my father is in prison. And then they had vowed as a family that every moment of their lives, they'll make sure that it's spent to make sure that their father comes back. I also happen to be lucky in the sense that I had the best teachers. You know, when I was taught by one of the professors who had never studied, who studied abroad, one of the most interesting things that when we did not do well, he'll be very worried. And I had another professor who, when we did not do well, he celebrated. And he came from the university, whose name I will not mention, where he also went through hell. But the point is, because he had gone through hell, he was also giving us hell. And it brings to mind what you call the phrase that I used that says, to those to whom evil is done, they do evil in return, which is the point that Professor Moyo was raising. That sometimes because they don't know any better, they simply repeat what they are familiar with. And that is the biggest challenge, and it's an issue of self-love and self-hate. If you love yourself, you will not want to do that to your own people. But what I also know is, having traveled, Professor Matadi, I found the notion of phobia against people who look like you to be almost universal. I found it expressed also among the African Americans that when we went there, we were treated better than they were. And it's understandable because we were not a threat to the US. We were simply passerbys. But they were catching hell. And I made it my business that I will stay in the black community. And I was always amazed that as Africans in America, we'll group ourselves and we'll sit We'll have a postgraduate associations. You will have that, and what we'll do is that we'll bring the prejudices that we have about African Americans, and African Americans will also have the prejudice about us. To an extent that you have some African Americans who says, "I'm glad I'm not African." But once I stayed in the black community and understood what they were going through, it helped me understand so much. One of my friends had a button which moved me as an African. It was in a march against racism, and he had a button that says, "I just love being black." But that was a statement of protest, that after what this regime, the belly of the beast, has done to them on a daily basis, that they must be denigrated. He still says, "At least I have control in loving me." And he was able to connect with our struggles. And some of us were able to connect with their struggles. So it was in those struggles where I spent most of my time, sometimes not in class, but in the protest, that I met a large number of African Americans who I still value as friends today. So the notion of self-love does matter, but it is not something that will emerge without you taking conscious position of being with the underdogs. So that is what shaped me. But what also helped me is that for some reason, there was a time, Professor Moyo, you won't believe it, when people thought I was bright, you know. So I happened to get fellowships. I end up teaching in a number of in a number of universities in the States. So teaching in those places also give you a sense of confidence, you know. So that is what helped me. It's always being engaged, being curious. I mean, friends that I've known for more than 40 years, people like Mulifi Asante, when he was still trying to grapple with the idea of Afrocentricity, I was there in Albany in '87 while he produced the first book on Afrocentricity. I was part of those debates. So you could say I was lucky. And also being a Sowetan and having been involved and having been in government, also have the beautiful things that I've traveled in every space. I've not only been an academic, I've been in government. I've been in the private sector. There was a time when I was in the bank. Unfortunately, I left without money, but that's the only regret that I have, you know. Now, the issue of progress of nations, you need to locate it also within, no nation is the same as the other. And the oppression of different countries was always different. And some, with Africa, the oppression of African people was total. It was, you had epistemicide. You had their soul being broken. If you go to China, because they also went through the same, one of the things that they had was their religion. One of the things that they had was their also script and civilization. One of those things that they had was also given almost a breathing space, like Hong Kong. But Africa, on the other hand, became and continued to become a place of colonial extraction. And that meant that the violence against the African body, African mind had to continue. The Hong Kong, which did not have, does not have, and the Singapore, what do you call it, resources, became less of a problem. But also the distances. But also what you also have settler colonialism. In places where there's been no settler colonialism, it was also easy for people to regroup and become themselves. If you go to Indonesia, where I was, they were able to become Indonesians again. They even reclaimed their own language. Their religions were not wiped out. So it's also a dependence. It depends on the extent to which you are the attack on the minds. And Africans, even today, remain the most colonized, especially the elite of Africans. The African elites are more of a problem towards emancipation of the people than the ordinary masses. They are the ones who are likely to sell you out. And they are also the ones, one of the things I did not mention also about the African national struggle is that in the end, in the 70s, which would have been another colonial turn, was when African governments began to attack the intelligentsia within the universities. Whereas in other countries, they embraced these talented people to be part of the solution. In Africa, even today, one of the things that you are punished for in this country is to think. If you choose to think differently, you'll discover that the truth shall set you free. It will set you free from your job, from your family, from everything. So that is the reality of this country, that you're not allowed. And this is why, even as we speak, we're going through the most interesting time in terms of the building of a democracy with all its discontents. But where are the black professionals in the debates that should shape this country? They are very silent. And it is that silence that has killed Africa. They are more concerned about the material comforts. So part of Africa's lack of progress is largely African. It is not Western. It is not. It is because we have allowed ourselves that those of us who are there simply saying, how much can I get? And you remain. So, as I say, the truth telling in this country and in the continent is in a crisis. So if you understand that, and you also know you need to get to a certain position also, where some of us can take positions that we take because we can afford to do so. That's why I'm also saying that when you're in a position to speak against injustice, do so because many other people are not able to do so. You also speak on their behalf. But I can tell you that those people who have betrayed Africa are Africans. I mean, I was giving an example of the convoys when you go to Nigeria, when the president drives. But it will be the very same president with cap in hand who will be going out there, you know. So there's a soul searching. That's why this notion of decolonization is important. It's an existential challenge because it speaks to the survival of a people. The whole notion of epistemicide. So I happen to have the benefit of at least going through that. Now you ask me about the Minister of Education, which I'll never be. One of the things that we have said, actually my book was my book on the black perspective, which is you can get, was simply to say what the Minister of Higher Education should do. It's a book edited by myself, where I brought the top scholars in 1996, when the government came up with the National Plan on Higher Education and white people. We came up with a perspective of what needs to be done. And during that time, one of the things that we talked about was leveling the playing field. And we're saying leveling the playing field because we're saying the fact that were disadvantaged. It was deliberate. It was not an accident. And we spelled out a number of systemic disadvantages. And I'll just mention a few of them. One, all historically black universities are placed away from city centers, effectively making sure that they're distant from the economic centers. Two, that they also make sure that they don't offer courses that speak also to the issues of economy. This is why it is only now that UniZulu offers engineering. The notion of psycha, that's why we have Professor Fakrin here. The chartered accountants were not offering that, all forms of engineering. So there was also deliberate program disadvantage. Thirdly, there was also, we became home to the financially insecure and disadvantaged students. So effectively, we could not even raise resources to get the best. When Adam Abi became a vice chancellor of it, he came up with a plan that never flew. When he wanted to do what Harvard does, to buy the best scholars at the top and pay them a lot of money. We could not do that. So not only do we have the most financially destitute, the poorest of the poor, we also get the students who are underprepared. So the black universities, despite all the disadvantage, they're able to produce people like ourselves. So we are able to produce more with less. But all that was also deliberate. So when we wrote that book, we said also you must change the philosophy of education. It's a level playing field, making sure that the resources are also given and support them, but we never got that support. So other than the notion of your reckless ambition that I'll ever be a minister, it will not happen.
In South Africa, there is democracy. If people now call you and say, we want you to be our minister, you have to surrender to democracy. One will say it's still part of the doubt that you don't believe that you are worth of the position, but we do believe. That's why we ask such questions. Thank you very much to Prof. Siepe for such a comprehensive response to the questions that were brought to the front. Can we have a second last round for question and answer session? I also see that it adds to the presentation. We are able to take more from Prof. Siepe, Professor Moyo, and other intellectuals. Can we have a set of 3 questions so that we proceed to discussions? On the first day, we were buzzing with questions, so it seems as though it is becoming clearer of what is expected of us, and it means that now we are conscious. Or is there any question, or Professor Kuzwa, you'll need a roving mic or coming? Can we have a roving mic? Okay. Can we have a roving mic so that people online are able to? Also, we are not closing doors to the online people. Also, we are also welcome to ask questions. You can put your questions on chat, or you can just raise your hand, then we'll give you the opportunity. Over to you, Prof.
Yeah, I have just something to share with the House. You may take it as a joke if you want to. The whole issue of definitions, when people try to find definitions. Yesterday we spoke about translating concepts into mother tongue. I remember, I think we were still at the university at that time where there was a concept of a tsotsi that was introduced. And the definition was that a tsotsi is a youngster, a black youngster who is willing to kill at the slightest provocation. So Professor Siepe said yesterday, it's translating into a concept into another, giving a term from another language does not change the whole disposition that goes with that concept. If you know that you cannot associate yourself with that definition or people who are defined in that manner, that I think Prof. Matadi spoke about Afrophobia. You know, this mystification, I think Professor Moyo alluded to this black on black hatred. It's because of the mystification and illusion-based knowledge about us. You know, when they talk about, even on the on media, if you see people of another country, they are portrayed as people who are not developed, people who are subhumans. So I think the whole issue, I'm addressing what Prof asked, but in a way I'm trying to say we can also look at it from another way. I was in Cape Town and I've realized that although we are colonized in a certain way, but the colonizers themselves, they don't know who they are in terms of where they belong. If I remember at some stage we defined the concept African and Afrikaner. And we said, if I am an African, when I write down to say what nationality are you, so when you say I'm an African, and then a group of African-speaking people said we are Africans because we are Afrikaners. So I'm saying this thing is so reciprocal because you may think that it hit you in this way, but it also hit the other person because somehow there is a lot of uncertain. Hence, there is this, you know, I don't know how to explain it, but to be unsure about your identity. I think that's where we are now as Africans and South Africans. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment, Professor Kuzwayo, which is basically to say that when you are decolonizing, when you were colonized, when you are decolonizing yourself, you also need to free your colonizer. You need to decolonize your colonizer. So basically, I think that's that. I think because I had to just summarize it because the online online attendees are not able to hear when we're using the roving mic. Do we have any question online before? Can we send the mic to the gentleman that side? Do we have any questions online? I know sometimes when you're attending some meetings online, you will be doing something else and then your laptop will be attending the meeting online. I'm not saying it's like that. Yes.
Thank you, Program Director. My question is directed to, I'm not sure who's going to answer on behalf of the university, but I just wanted to find out. Oh, my name is Talent Mgomezulu from the Department of Law. So I just wanted to find out as to how is the universities going to go about conscientizing the staff personnel. Was, I think the people who will be at the forefront of implementing this concept of decolonization will be the staff personnel. So, and it speaks to the ideological character of an individual as to how does he view this. So I just wanted to find out as to how the university will go about conscientizing the staff personnel, so that we'll have that element of togetherness in promoting unity towards the implementation, the robust implementation of this program, as well as the issue of monitoring and evaluation. What apparatus does the university will put in place to ensure the proper implementation of this decolonization? Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Mngomezulu, for that. Maybe before anyone answers, especially about conscientizing staff and so forth, I think partly the answer to that question is the course that's going to be there, the 3 months to 6 months course would be part of what you are asking. And also, Professor Kuzwayo touched on monitoring and evaluation. She said that we need to work on a plan so that we are able to see what we are willing to achieve, so that from time to time we are able to evaluate. But I'm not blocking the answers. I'm just recapping what has been said as far as the questions are concerned. Can you take that one, Prof. Kuzwayo? Especially of conscientizing and answer on behalf of the monitoring and evaluation.
Colleagues, I don't know whether you are aware that we at TLC, Teaching and Learning Center, we receive funds which are called UCDP grant from DHET, which is meant for capacity building. So we run workshops to facilitate some of the APPs and the strategic plan of the university. So we organize workshops for staff for capacity building purposes, and we also encourage faculties to organize their own workshops, which we will support financially. If maybe you need somebody to come and address the faculty on this issue in particular, because we are supporting the strategic plan, you can make an arrangement with us so that we allocate, we make bookings for you, we pay for the person who is maybe coming to address you in terms of transport and so on. Even the venues will pay for all those items. That is part of support of making sure that these the vision of the university is achieved, of which a Node for Africa thought is one. And another question was students, was it? Okay, the curriculum renewal aspect, it also fall within the ambit of teaching and learning. So we are also going to sit with you colleagues through the dean and the deputy deans and the HODs to see how best we can model the implementation plan of this presentation that Professor Siepe is providing, because they're going to impact on our curriculum renewal. I hope I addressed them.
Thank you very much, Professor Siepe. The online people are complaining that when we're using the roving mic, they can't hear anything. So from now on, anyone who is responding or asking a question, may they please come to the fore. Anyone who wishes to add or on to the response to Mr. Mngomezulu? Oh, can you come to the front?
Greeting colleagues, professors, and all colleagues. It's Mthokozi Sikhuzayo before you from Law Department as well.